Hey everybody, welcome to Apologetics. I'm so pumped you're joining us today to have Dr. Michael Huemer, also known as Galactic Overlord. He works in epistemology, ethics, metaethics, political philosophy, and so much more. Today we're going to be talking about a section of a book that Mike wrote, and talk about the fine tuning argument. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm super excited to talk about fine tuning and all this stuff. It's a really interesting thing. So to get things started, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about like who you are, like what you do, and what got you interested in topics like the fine tuning argument?
Yeah, I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado in Boulder, where I've been for a couple of decades or something. Yeah, I've written like 10 books, including this very nice one that everybody should buy: Knowledge, Reality, and Value. And I've written something like 80 articles in ethics, political philosophy, metaethics, epistemology, and a small amount of metaphysics. Okay. Um, I first heard about the fine tuning argument from my colleague Michael Tooley, who was a prominent metaphysician, and he didn't endorse the argument, but and this was like a couple of decades ago when I was a young professor, um, and I started thinking about it, and it was very interesting and challenging, and it's just a fascinating. Just the empirical facts are fascinating, and trying to figure out what's going on and I mean, okay, like throughout your life, you just sort of take for granted everything that's familiar. You take for granted life, that there's life around you all over the place. And so, like, you don't commonly feel amazed by it, but when you learn the facts about, you know, how, how it works and like what's necessary for life to exist, you should be constantly amazed. You're constantly amazed that there is this stuff, and it's a deep puzzle. It's a mystery why it's even possible for there to be living things.
So to get things started, Mike, like what is the fine tuning argument like all about? What's it trying to bring forth?
Yeah, so it's said that there are certain parameters of the universe, as we say, that have to be fine tuned for life to be possible, right? And so by these parameters, I mean things like the gravitational constant, or the mass of the proton, or the ratio of the gravitational force to the electromagnetic force. Okay, so these are all just these are quantities that are very general features of how the universe works. All right, and it turns out, according to scientists, that um, if you imagine them being a little bit different, some of these parameters being a little different from their current values, you can predict what would happen. And it turns out that life wouldn't be possible if you change some of these parameters by just a small amount. So if the gravitational constant were a little bit larger, then gravity would be stronger. And then you get predictions like the universe would have recollapsed long before stars formed, and so then obviously there would be no life. Or if the gravitational constant were a little bit weaker, then the universe would have expanded too quickly for stars to form. And then there would just be, clouds of expanding hydrogen gas or something like that. And then obviously there would be no life. Okay. And so these are the sort of things that people say. And there's just like multiple examples of that. So, like adjusting the electromagnetic force might lead to there not being any elements heavier than hydrogen or something like that. And then there are no life forms made out of hydrogen, so there'd be no life, and so on, right? Okay, and yeah, and so then people think, oh, okay, so it's really lucky that there's life. And then you think like, oh, we need some kind of explanation of why we got so lucky, like why the universe just happens to have the parameter values that allow life to exist, right? And then some people say, well, maybe it's because the universe has a creator, and the creator wanted there to be life, maybe because life is valuable, maybe because life is the most valuable thing. Okay, and so then and the creator made the parameters that way. Okay, so this is like the fine tuning argument.
So why think that like fine tuning is real? Like why think that like oh it's like maybe like these parameters have to be in this like exact or like ordered way for there to be life at all in the first place?
Well, so I'm not scientist. I'm not an, astronomer or physicist or a chemist, right? But, this is what people say, right? So like I take this on testimony that a bunch of scientists say this, right? And by the way, these are not like a bunch of theistic scientists, right? So like, it's not like they're saying this out of bias, right? It's like, so I trust them that they could figure out what would happen if the gravitational constant were stronger. Right. And so, like sometimes when people hear about this, they think, oh, well, you're just relying on the current form of life that we're familiar with. So, like maybe if the universe had if the laws of nature were different, then there would be different kinds of life that, we don't know the requirements for. But no, this is totally implausible if you understand what the argument is saying, right? It's like they're not saying like, oh, there wouldn't be the exact kind of life. No, like if there was just a giant cloud of hydrogen gas, there wouldn't be any life. Nobody thinks that, and if you think that is plausible that there would be a life made out of just hydrogen, think about like when people are searching for extraterrestrial life, where do you think they should search? You think they should search in a hydrogen gas cloud in interstellar space? Or like, should they search on the sun? No, like no one would spend $1 on that search, right? Because they know you're not going to find anything. Okay. So anyway, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful, Mike. Thank you. So it seems like okay, we have this fine tuning where we think about like us existing right here, where we're talking right now, recording this podcast. Like it takes these certain parameters to line up in a certain way for there to be some sort of life to exist. What are like some of the different explanations then for fine tuning?
Yeah. So like there are two leading explanations, right? That people thought of. The one is there's an intelligent designer. Okay. So and theists like this. So maybe God, or maybe it's not exactly God, because the argument doesn't establish whether the designer is all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good. But it would have to be very powerful, I guess, and at least somewhat good, because we're assuming that it values life or something like that. So, okay, it's somewhat good, powerful, and pretty knowledgeable. All right, and then the other explanation is there's a multiverse, right? Which is there are many parallel universes, and the parameters of the universe differ from one universe to another. So maybe there are parallel universes with different gravitational constants, and there's just a whole lot of them, maybe even infinitely many. So it's not surprising that there are at least some where the parameters just happen to be the right values for life to be possible. And of course, you, like all observers, observe that, because all the times when that didn't happen, there was nobody there to observe it. So don't be surprised that you observe those parameter values, right? It's like those are the two leading explanations. There's like, John Leslie, I think, had like a weird third view, which is Neoplatonism, which is that goodness has inherent attractive power. So like the fact that life is good caused the universe to adjust its parameters or something like that to make it possible for life. But I just think this is a total non-starter. And I don't think anyone else thinks that that's like a good theory.
So what maybe then like okay, so we have these different explanations, like maybe it's God, like maybe there's a multiverse. What are like some of like maybe like the bad explanations you've heard for fine tuning? Like things that maybe are like objections that are put to like try to explain away fine tuning, but you think are just like guys, come on, it is 2024. We gotta move on from this.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, so like I think the Neoplatonism is a bad explanation that, it's like because life is good, and the fact that life is good has causal powers, and that caused the parameters to be that way. And the reason I think this is a bad theory is it seems like you could test the hypothesis that goodness has causal power, and actually I don't think anyone's going to do the tests because nobody would take it seriously. Okay, so like like say there's a hurricane coming, and like you could do a controlled experiment, and like there could be some people in the path of the hurricane, and then like in another condition there could be no people in the path of the hurricane, and then you see whether the hurricane is more likely to strike when there are people in the path. Everybody knows that the probability would be completely unaffected by the number of people who are in the path. So goodness doesn't have causal powers anyway. Okay. Sometimes people just say, you know like Huemer, you're saying that it's so unlikely that there would be life, but there's really no way to assign probabilities to that kind of thing. Like, the values of the parameters and the laws of nature, there's no way of assigning probabilities to there being one value or another because they're just always that way. And so, really, whatever way they are, you should just accept that without, there's no need to explain it. There's no reason to be surprised by anything about the laws of nature because they were just always that way, whatever. Um, yeah. And so, my response to this is imagine this, unusual scenario. This is not going to happen, but imagine it turned out that there were unusual features of the laws of nature that somehow cause certain chemicals at the microscopic level to, on their own, form into shapes that look like English words. And like there were just some like really specific, features of the laws of nature, or complexities in the laws of nature that just happened to make that happen. And like when you get certain chemicals, they form into the words "made by God" in English in Times New Roman font. And like if you look at the look at the chemicals under the microscope, everybody sees that. Okay, and now so this response to the fine-tuning argument says, well, you can't assign probabilities to the laws of nature. So you shouldn't be surprised by anything about the laws of nature. And so you can't infer anything. Okay, so this response implies that in that scenario, when you look at the crystals that say "made by God," you should be totally unsurprised. You should infer nothing at all. You should just go, "Oh, okay. Well, nothing to see here. It just happens to be that way." Like, you shouldn't think anything about that, right? Okay, and so like I think that if your opposition to theism is that extreme, that you would say that you need to like take a break and just kind of relax a little bit.
Okay, so that's really helpful, Mike. What I'd love to do now is let's talk about a couple of these like plausible or maybe more plausible explanations of fine tuning, at least in your mind. Um, if you describe it that way, what do you think about like? Let's just start with like we'll start with theism, and we'll get into the multiverse. I'd love to start with like maybe like some of we'll do pros and cons. So maybe like some pros. Like if you're thinking like okay, I want to say like God is a good explanation of fine tuning. What are some of like the pros of this idea?
Well, I mean, the only pro is that it explains that the evidence, right? Like so,
Yeah.
it's the evidence that the parameters are fine tuned, and like you could,
hmm
okay, so now we have now we know why that would be. I mean, like unless you want to say other reasons why theism is good, right? But I would think of those as just being different arguments, right?
hmm
Right, like, and I'm not actually impressed by other arguments for theism. So you're like, okay, the cosmological argument. Oh, we need an explanation for why the universe as a whole exists. So people would say that. Um, I don't really think that that's a very good explanation, right? Basically, I don't see why the universe as a whole needs an explanation more than God Himself does. So it's like you could explain why this exists by having something else that exists, but why don't you have to explain why that other thing exists? And then you could say, well, that other thing always existed, but then why can't I say the universe always existed? Okay, but the fine tuning argument is different from this because there's a thing to explain. It's not just saying you need to explain why stuff exists, which I don't think that goes anywhere. Okay, but there are specific features of the stuff that seem super improbable, right? And just like just seems like we got super lucky, right? Um, yeah.
So when you're thinking about like explaining like fine tuning, like we have this fine tuning argument, it seems to like point towards like maybe there needs to be some explanation for why it's aligned this way. Are you just seeing this as like okay, well, like because of this data of fine tuning, maybe we can rule out some like bad theories of the world, and maybe there's some like other theories that could explain this. Is that kind of how you're thinking about fine tuning and like where it leads?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could think of everything, and you could think of all inferences in sort of that way that all inferences involve ruling out bad theories, right? You could say that. So in this case, what's like the bad theory is just pure chance. Like there's no reason, right? And we just We just have the universe this way for no reason. Like, that seems unsatisfying, right? Because it's like just super improbable. It seems like it's super improbable, right? Um, like it used to be that and maybe it still is, that the orthodox version of the Big Bang Theory had it that time just began. Time itself began in 14 billion BC. Okay, and at the first moment of time, there just was a huge amount of energy in a tiny region, like almost a single point, and it was moving outward. And that was the first thing that ever happened for no reason. And that was the Orthodox theory. And I say for no reason because that's supposed to be the first thing that ever happened, because it was supposed to be the beginning of time itself. So you can't posit any cause of that. Okay, and I think that's a bad theory. Right? I think if that's a good theory, then I think another good theory would be maybe the universe appeared in 1950. Maybe that was the beginning of time, and the universe just was in the state that it was in 1950 for no reason. Okay, and wow, that seems really improbable. So that's true. It's like a really improbable state, but actually, the Big Bang state is even more improbable. Because right, and the way that I know this is because I've heard from scientists that entropy is constantly increasing over time, and that means the universe is moving from less probable to more probable states. So okay, so starting in 14 billion BC, it started in the least probable state, which is to say the lowest entropy state. So anyway, but so saying that the parameters of the universe are a certain way for no reason, I view as kind of similar to that. It's like, yeah, you could say anything just for no reason. If you're your theory of anything could always be, maybe it's just like that for no reason. But you shouldn't do that if it's something that's really specific, right? And also, if other people have an explanation of why it would be that way, you know.
Do you think that any explanation is going to end in some sort of, we're trying to explain the world and why it exists, it's just going to end in something that's just unexplained? Like you talked about, hey, maybe someone says oh, it's the universe just began in 14 billion BC and it just began that way, or maybe it began in 1950 for no reason, and in 1950 everything starts just that way for no reason. Do you think that any explanation would lead to this kind of a similar story where things just kind of start for no reason, or maybe they've always been this way for no reason, and that's just kind of the way it is?
Well, I mean, your alternatives are so theists sometimes say, yeah, you have to have something that has no explanation, but we're going to trace it back to something that's necessary. And then they claim that God's existence is necessary, right? Which I don't buy. So I don't think that really helps. But the alternative is, well, maybe there's just an infinite regress. So there are things, everything that happens is explained by something that happened before it, and maybe time just goes back forever. So it's just an infinite series of explanations. And to me, that's fine. You can come back forever. So you don't actually have to have the thing that happened that has no explanation. You could say, however, this is what Samuel Clarke says, okay? And so in his version of the cosmological argument, you could say, oh, but then the whole series, the whole infinite series is something that you're saying happened for no reason. Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. Right, but but the whole series, but there's no particular event that happened for no reason. Each event had an explanation. That was something before it. And the whole series isn't an event, right? It's just all of the events, right? So there's not a reason for everything. But anyway, I don't know what's wrong with that.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. So you talked a little bit about how God could explain fine tuning. What about the multiverse? Could the multiverse be a plausible explanation? Maybe dive into first what is the multiverse, but what is it, and could it be a good explanation for fine tuning?
Yeah, so there are a number of people, and this is not just science fiction authors and philosophers, but actually some scientists in cosmology think that there are multiple parallel universes. Okay, and then you might think, well, what do you mean by multiple universes? Doesn't the universe just mean everything that exists? And so, no, in this context, universe doesn't mean everything. It means something like everything that's causally connected to us, or things that are causally connected to each other. Okay, so there's like our universe, which includes all of the stars that we can see, but maybe somewhere there's another large collection of stars which don't interact with us at all, and so we can call that another universe. Right? Some people think that the other universes are just very far away in space, right? And as a matter of fact, it is possible for them to be far enough away that we could literally never interact with them, right? Like, in infinite time, we would still never interact with them. Okay, and the reason for that is that space itself is said to be expanding, and if you're far enough away from something, then the rate at which space is expanding could be adding more distance than the speed of light. It could be adding distance between you and the other thing faster than the speed of light, so you can never reach it. Okay, so anyway, other people think that the other universes are separated like in other dimensions. Like maybe there's more than the 4 dimensions of our space-time, and like so there's our universe, and then in the other dimension there's another universe, and so on. Okay, and so yeah, is this a good theory? So, and then maybe the different universes have different parameter values in the laws of nature. So now the main objection to this theory, like as an explanation of the fine-tuning in the literature, is the this universe objection, which is something like this: that actually the postulate of other universes doesn't explain anything. It doesn't explain our evidence at all. It's not just like an inferior explanation. It's not an explanation at all. Okay, because our evidence is not that there is at least one universe that contains life. Our evidence is that this universe contains life. In positing any universes other than this one has no effect on what you should observe in this universe. So like the probability of there being life in this universe would be unaffected by whatever is going on with other universes, if there are any or not. Okay, so like an analogy is like I flip a coin, it comes up heads 5 times in a row, and I go, wow, that was unlikely. Okay, and then I imagine saying, maybe there's just like a lot of other coins. So maybe that's why that happens. And so if there were if there were 100 people flipping coins, yeah, I don't know how many. Anyway, if there were 500 people flipping coins, then it would be likely that at least one of them would get heads 5 times in a row. So that's probably the explanation. There's just a lot of people flipping coins out there. Like, no, that's wrong, right? That isn't an explanation at all, because my evidence is not that there was at least one coin that came up heads. My evidence was that this coin came up heads 5 times in a row. The probability of that happening is unaffected by what happens with other coins, if there are any or not. Okay, so similarly, the argument would be the probability of anything that we observe in this universe is completely unaffected by other universes. So positing other universes does nothing at all to explain our evidence. Okay, all right. So I think that's a leading objection to the literature, which I used to think was a correct objection. Anyway, okay, yeah, that makes
Well, you
sense.
said, and now I'm curious. You used to think it was like what was the word you said? How did you describe the objection? I've got you said it used to be a what? You used to think that was a good objection to the multiverse?
The this universe objection. Yeah, I used to think that that was correct, and so the multiverse theory, just doesn't work, and so then there's only intelligent design left. Later, I came to the conclusion that no, actually, the multiverse is a possible viable theory, and that's because I started to think, actually, my evidence isn't something about this universe. Fundamentally, the evidence that you have is something about you. So, okay, you get up and you look at the thermos, and the evidence that you acquire when you look at the thermos is not something about this universe containing the thermos. The evidence that you acquire is you are seeing a thermos now. So it's about you, and it's about the present time, And then it's about the qualitative character of your experiences. That's the fundamental evidence that you have. Okay. And actually, you don't perceive the universe. You don't perceive what universe you're in. So, like, if you were in a different universe, but there were qualitatively similar things, you would have the same evidence that you currently have. Right? Which shows that the correct fundamental characterization of your evidence doesn't mention which universe you're in. Okay, so then when you think about it that way, you realize that, okay, so if there were more universes, then perhaps you would have a better chance of living in at least one universe. And so then you'd have a better chance of having the evidence that you currently have. Okay, now that assumes that it's possible for you to live in another universe. If there were multiple universes, then you'd have a higher chance. And okay, and so if you think that you have like an immaterial soul, then it makes sense, right? Like, it makes sense that your soul could have been in another universe. It could have inhabited a body in another universe. Okay. And so if there are more universes, then better chance of having the evidence that you have. So actually, that is a valid explanation. Which I think that most atheists would not like this, though. Right? They would not like this account of how you could be in another universe, right? Because your soul could be embodied. But anyway, but I think that's a viable account.
So, Mike, I'm wondering, we've talked about a lot of different things here. Like, what do you think is the best explanation for like why there is fine tuning? Like, why do we live in a universe where the physical laws and whatnot are lined up in a way that like it allows us to like exist and talk about this and you being like galactic overlord and things like that?
Yeah.
What do you think best explains fine tuning?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I don't know. Like, I expected you to ask
You're
that.
telling me that like you've been a professor for like over 20 years, you said, and you don't have all the answers to like everything?
I don't
Really?
know.
Are
Yeah.
you serious, Mike? Really?
Yeah. But, I've got a few answers. Yeah. So, I think there are a couple of big mysteries in the universe. And like one of them is why consciousness exists, which I don't know. And I entered philosophy partly to find that out, but it turned out that nobody knew. And then I tried to figure it out, but I couldn't. So anyway, and then, another one is just like why the universe exists. But okay, but anyway, and the other one is sort of like, well, why the universe, like at the time of the Big Bang, it started in this super low entropy state, and like that's mysterious because it's super improbable. But anyway, okay. Um like as, as far as I know, like the major theories that people have thought of are the multiverse and intelligent design. I'm not super happy with either of these. And so it's likely that the correct explanation is something that we haven't thought of. Okay, so like, why am I not happy with the intelligent design? Well, like a couple of things. So one is like, well, okay, if the universe were created by an intelligent designer, it would be surprising that there aren't other signs of this other than that life exists. So like the rest of what we observe makes it look like it's ungoverned. And so like horrible stuff happens all the time. And like if there was an intelligent being who was like in control of the universe, you would expect fewer horrible things. More generally, you just expect to see some signs of him elsewhere, right? Just like sometimes, other than right, other than just like the way the universe was at the start. Um, right. Although, as an aside, I know that some theists say that they do see those signs. Okay. Um, but then one of the things that I think is not good about this theory is that it's too flexible. Like just about theories in general, it's not good when your theory is super flexible, meaning that like it could accommodate almost anything. And that's kind of the way I think about theories where there's just an intelligent being who did something. Why did this happen? Well, an intelligent being did it. Because if you think about it, like, and the intelligent being is super powerful. So if you think about it, well, then that accommodates almost anything. Almost anything that could happen, you could say, well, an intelligent being could have done that. And like sometimes that's the correct thing to say. You're like, there's a few days ago, like I saw there's some like picture appearing in my Facebook feed of some rock formation or something, but it was some rock with an unusual shape with like these holes cut into it. And as soon as you look at it, you know people did that, because like it's carved into this shape, and it just doesn't look like a natural shape. And you're like, I don't know why it's like that, but I don't know why they did that, but somebody did that. Okay, so anyway, okay, but the thing is, like, when you posit that humans did something, there are more constraints because you know something about humans, you know something about our capabilities. But if you posit that like an all-powerful or at least super powerful being did something, then like there are just very few constraints. And that means that you could have said this almost no matter what you saw. Right. And then that makes it like not very satisfying as a theory, if you see what I mean. Right. So like if you want to confirm a theory, you want it to fit a specific small range of data, and then you want the actual data to be in that range. Anyway, okay. Should we pause there, or before I go on to the multiverse and what I don't like about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's helpful, Mike. I mean, I think to me, like, it seems like when I'm tracking, you're thinking about trying to explain Wi-Fi tuning. You're looking, okay, like there's two like explanations that can at least seem like at least plausibly explain the data, which are theism in the multiverse, at least at the moment. And you're saying, okay, well, there's God explanation. Okay, maybe it's good for fine tuning, but you don't think God would be a good explanation for these other things that we see, like evil and whatnot. And that's kind of like why you're pushing towards this, like, okay, maybe there's this explanation of fine tuning. We just don't really know what it is yet. So I think I'm tracking with you.
Yeah. I mean, like, well, so it's partly that theism doesn't explain the existence of evil, but it's also that the stuff that it explains in a not very satisfying way, because like it doesn't predict very specifically what you should observe. Right. Okay. Um, what I don't like about the multiverse. If this was just something that philosophers made up, then probably not many people would be taking it seriously. But it's actually a thing that some scientists say, that there's a multiverse. Okay, but I think most of the theories, maybe all of them, like of the actual scientists, posit an infinite multiverse. And so, okay, and like, yeah, what's wrong with that? Why not an infinite multiverse? Okay, now this is a little bit of an esoteric argument, okay, and controversial, but I think that if there was an infinite multiverse, then there should be multiple copies of me. And okay, so like the scientists will generally say this. They'll generally say like, okay, yeah, it's infinite, so there's like a copy of you that looks exactly like you somewhere, and like as similar to you as you like. Okay, but my thought is, well, if there are copies that are arbitrarily similar to me, there should be some that are close enough, similar enough to literally be me. that is, there should be some conditions that are sufficient for me to be incarnated, like something that a body can do, such that um, it will count as being my body or something like that. Okay, and so that means that I should be living multiple lives right now, which means like I should be having multiple streams of experience now. Okay. And now, and so they might start out the same, like, because like maybe to be me, it has to start out being in exactly the same state or something like that. But that can't guarantee that the environment is the same, right? So like their experiences should diverge. So I'm having this stream of experiences like when I started as a baby. I should have I should have experienced either multiple at the beginning, or I should have experienced my streams of experience diverging, and then like I see different things happening, or see two different visual fields, or in fact, infinitely many, right? Because it's an infinite multiverse, and that doesn't happen, right? Okay, so this is a little bit weird, and like many philosophers would think, no, that shouldn't happen, right? um, but this I think this depends on my dualistic views about the mind body relation. But I'm highly convinced of dualism. So even though it's very controversial.
One thing I appreciate about you, Mike, is like it doesn't seem like to me like you're just trying to be like, oh, what would be cool people be cool with if I think this? Like you're very just like open, like this is what I think, and maybe I'm like the one person in Colorado or even the Earth that believes this, but like I'm cool with it because to me it makes sense at least the way I think of it. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So, okay.
yeah, I'm not, like many people are sort of like trying to get a specific conclusion. They're trying to get things to go a certain way, but I'm just trying to get a rational conclusion, you might say, just like trying to get the thing that makes sense and that's probable given the evidence, right? And yeah, okay.
Yeah. So in your view, Mike, like it seems like with fine tuning, okay, there's this further explanation. We don't know what it is yet. Maybe one day we'll discover it, or maybe not. Do you have any idea of like what direction this could be in? Like if we think about like what could this explanation look like would it be something maybe more scientific or something more philosophical maybe? Do you have any idea what direction this could go in your mind?
Um, uh, um, I don't know, but I have a sense that like maybe some of the big mysteries of the universe are connected, right? So like, yeah, okay, there's the fine tuning, which is sort of it's sort of the mystery about why there's life. There's also like the mystery about why there's consciousness. So because there could have been life without consciousness, and there was for a long time, whatever, at least hundreds of millions of years before there were animals, right? So, and then there's sort of like there's a mystery about the beginning of the universe, right? Which you know you could take kind of a long time explaining why this is mysterious, okay? But the scientists think that 14 billion years ago the universe started out in a really unusual state. It was like with this huge concentration of energy, which is a super low entropy state, and it's very weird that that was the case, right? And there's no known explanation for why. Or I guess there are theories about why that might have been. Okay, but anyway, we don't know. So okay, so then I think, oh, maybe these three things are connected, right? I don't know, right? And so like I guess an advantage of theism is that it sort of connects those. It's like, well, like God could do whatever he wants, so he could start out the universe in a super low entropy state, and maybe that's necessary for life to evolve, or it's necessary to make it likely that life evolves, right? Um, and it was like maybe gave it super low entropy so that it would have a long run, right? So like it could go for many billions of years before reaching thermal equilibrium. So and then maybe God just like created these psychophysical laws so that there would be consciousness. It's like okay, um, yeah. What else? Directions that people should like, yeah, like but I don't know what the evidence would like. Like I feel like we need more evidence besides just like you know this is an explanation of these mysteries.
Mm. Yeah, I understand. Are there other like big mysteries you talked about? Like you talked about consciousness, like why the universe exists as a whole, at all, the low entropy state. You mentioned like psychophysical harmony. Are there other big mysteries that you see kind of out there in the world of like philosophy and science and all this that you think need explanation that we're just not close to at the moment?
Well, I feel like those are the big mysteries. There might be others that I don't know about. Um, but like yeah, there are a bunch of controversies in philosophy, but not really ones that mystify me. Okay, so like some people would think, oh yeah, there's a big puzzle about moral value. you know, does it really exist? And if so, like why or how can there be objective values or something like that? But I'm just not moved by that. I don't find it mysterious. Um, and I guess I just feel like no, it's a necessary truth. So it's, it's a necessary truth that gratuitous pain and suffering are bad. So there's nothing mysterious about that. If you understand what it means, then you should see those true. So anyway, and I feel that way about a lot of philosophical issues, right? Like there's a super controversial position that I think is just obvious, and I don't know why we're arguing about it. Okay, so there's like the debate about nominalism versus realism about universals in metaphysics, and to me, I just think no, I don't think this is a big puzzle. Like obviously there are universals. It's trivial. I don't know why people are denying it. Or there's like empiricism versus rationalism in epistemology, and I just no, obviously rationalism It's obviously correct. I don't know why there's a debate there. So now I'm portraying myself as being super dogmatic because these are very controversial views. But maybe I'm super dogmatic, or maybe just like there's just a bunch of unreasonable people who just have crazy views. It could be that. Oh, I wanted to say another thing though, like like what should theists say about the problem of evil? Like, okay, and like so to me the most satisfying thing. Okay, this isn't so. Any traditional theist wouldn't be happy with this, but to me the most satisfying thing to say is actually, like, you don't really understand how big the universe is, and it's a big project. It's been around. Okay, it's been around at least 14 billion years, but actually, I think it's infinite. It goes back into the past infinitely. But also, there's like something like 10 to the 22 or 10 to the 24 stars or something like that, and you don't really realize how big that is. Okay, so if there's a creator, he just has like a lot. There's just like a lot for him to worry about. That's not you in your life, and that's not even humanity. Like, so to us, humanity is everything. But if there's a God, to him, humanity is like a tiny, tiny portion of existence. And everything that's ever happened in human history is just a tiny portion of creation, right? It's like all of human history, all of recorded history is like 6,000 years or something like that. But the history of the universe is 14 billion years. Even the history of the earth is 4.5 billion years. Millions of species arose and went extinct before the first human ever appeared. And then there's just like, there's like a million, 10,000 million other stars. And they're all just as big as ours, right? So anyway, now, okay, this doesn't help you that much if you think God is literally all powerful, infinitely powerful, and infinitely knowledgeable or something like that. But I don't actually think that's possible. I don't think infinite power is possible. I think only like very large power is possible. Okay, so if God has finite but very large power, it might be that, well, it just can't fix everything.
That's awesome, Mike. And I want to just have you on again sometime just to talk about like the attributes of God and like what you think, because that's just interesting to think about, even like God's power and whatnot. But anything like any like last thoughts or things you want to share, Mike, before we start to wrap up today?
I don't know. No, but just buy my book.
Mike actually paid me $1 billion in Bitcoin to come on this podcast, just so you guys know. So yeah, just
Yeah.
kidding. Mike, how can people like follow you, connect with you, things like that?
I have a blog called Fake News on Substack. So FAKENOUS at substack.com, I guess. And also, check out my Amazon authors page because I have a lot of books, that you should immediately buy.
Well, I'll put some links down below to this video. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Appreciate you and just everything you're doing. I really enjoyed this, and there's a lot to learn. And I encourage people to check out Mike and his books and everything that's going on. If you're new to Tea and Apologetics, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And if you want to support the show, you can do it at patreon.com/Tea and Apologetics. But Mike, one last time, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great today.
Oh, been great talking to you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you everyone for listening. It was a good one, and God bless. We'll catch you next time.